location, location, location. Don't sell yourself short on buying something because you're literally picking up for next to nothing. I mean, we literally bought that thing for, we talk about below replacement cost. I mean, like, it was a joke how cheap we bought that. And we still had a hard time making the numbers work.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you're enjoying this show, I need a quick little favor from you. Just leave us a rating and review. I want to hear what you love about the show, what's working for you, but also let's get any feedback to anything we can do to make it work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We got a great show today. We got a returning guest, Mr. Kevin Bupp. Kevin Bupp is the founder and CEO of Sunrise Capital Investors, which invest in mobile home parks, parking lots, apartments, offices, and single-family homes all across the United States. Now, Kevin was a guest all the way back on episode 28. Yes, 28. The first year we had this show, and he gave us some great information then. So I'm excited to bring him back to the show today. Let's welcome Kevin Bupp. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today.
John, how you doing, buddy? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, Kevin, it's great to get you back on the show. For anyone who missed our previous conversation, we will make sure we link to episode 28 in the show notes. But for those folks who aren't familiar with your background, why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah, we'll do. And first and foremost, I appreciate you having me back. And congrats on the 5 years of running. I mean, most people give up after a couple episodes. They realize how hard it is and how much work it is for a podcast. So, kudos to you for keeping it going after 5 years. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
As far as the background, yeah, I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, I've been investing full time since I was 19. I'm 44 now, and I got my start like a lot of folks do in single family investments. I had a mentor that I met back in my hometown in Pennsylvania, and he was kind of a local, landlord. He had single family homes and smaller multifamily properties like duplexes and triplexes and things like that, and ultimately, he lived a very different lifestyle than what I knew growing up, and so it was really intriguing to me, of him and his business. He was about 20 years older than I, so he was kind of like my parents' age, and but it was just his life just seemed very different. A lot of flexibility, and he obviously worked for himself. My parents worked 9 to 5 jobs, blue collar jobs, and anyway, like I was at a point in my life, kind of a pivotal moment. I was, going to community college, not knowing what I want to do with my life, tending bar in the evenings, having fun doing that, but just with not a lot of direction. And this was something I saw that I could really wrap my arms around. So I ended up working for him for about 14 months, in between literally evenings at the bar and, classes 3 days a week. I would literally be out in the field doing literally doing whatever he needed me to do, John. I mean, I would pick up leases that were signed. I would drop them off. I'd go to Home Depot or anything that he needed. He was a solo entrepreneur type guy. And so he definitely needed an assistant. I ended up being that one for a good year and a half or so. And that led me to buy my first property. He ended up coaching me through buying that first investment. And it was a rundown single family home. Used a lot of his crews and his relationships to help fund it and renovate it. And that was it. That was like the seed that got planted. That was the very first deal, and it turned into hundreds more thereafter that. And I really I didn't try to reinvent the wheel. He was a buy and hold investor. I did have to make modifications to it. He'd already been doing it for a long time, so he had capital to work with, and he didn't necessarily have to sell anything to create liquidity. And I realized very quickly, I tried to keep that first rental, that the measly couple $100 a month of cash flow. It was going to take me a long time between that and bartending money to save up enough to buy the next one. And so my model turned into more of a, wholesale 2, keep 1, wholesale 2, keep 1. And I did that for many, many years, until I was able to, number one, I had my own capital sources, had my own lenders and private investors, and built a pretty big portfolio of single family properties in my early to mid 20s. And then I got introduced to multifamily, like a lot of us do, kind of make that transitional phase. And then from that point, the multifamily opened my eyes up to commercial real estate. And this is back, before '08. it opened my eyes up to bigger deals, and just I saw a lot of the efficiencies of doing bigger deals, and getting financing seemed to be a lot easier for doing bigger deals. Just the banking relationships were much deeper. Back then you couldn't go get back then there was no such thing as dedicated lenders for portfolios of single family homes. Like that just didn't exist. It was like one by one by one. It was a pain in the butt. Had to get many different banks working with me, and it was just a lot of work to build a portfolio of 100 single family homes. Whereas, as you know, you can go buy a 100-unit apartment complex in one fell swoop. So, anyway, that was a big eye opener for me. Commercial real estate in general, just self storage. I've done self storage. I've done office, done retail, done pretty much everything, and uh, May through 2008 had a lot of bruises, bumps going through that period of time. But ultimately, fast forward to 2011 is kind of when I think the second phase of my wealth creation and real estate career really blossomed, and it really brought us to where we are today. And that's mobile home parks. Like that's when I was introduced to the one asset class that I had never considered before, and it all was due to a lunch conversation I had with a guy by the name of Randy that was a banker, and he bought couple mobile home parks when he retired, and he intrigued me enough that I went and bought one back in 2012 after taking about a year of researching and making offers and trying to understand the business. And that's it. That one deal really blossomed into what Sunrise Capital Investors is today. We own mobile home communities nationwide, 13 different states at the present time. And it's been a phenomenal asset class. It's one back then that a lot of people didn't really give mind to. No one really cared about it. It wasn't attractive. You kind of snubbed your nose at it, but we were making a lot of money, buying a lot of deals, not a lot of competition. Today, it's a very different world. Lots more competition, lots of institutional capital in the space. A little harder to find good opportunities, but still a very profitable asset class, and one that's treated us and our investors quite well. So,
Kevin, thank you for sharing that background. I think a couple things stand out to me. One is you are really mindful of the people around you. You mentioned, kind of your parents working their W-2 jobs and this kind of mentor, but you realize this had a lot of free time, a lot of flexibility with the schedule. You started working with him, helping him out, and that kind of got you going to realize, you know what, there's something to this. That kind of got you to investing on the single family side, realizing that, hey, how do I scale this? Recognize multifamily might be a way to do that, and then eventually got into mobile home parks. And at that time, not a lot of competition. Now it's a little bit of a different market. For people who haven't considered mobile homes, and we talked about this a lot in episode 28, so we'll definitely check that out. But what makes mobile homes different than other asset classes, in particular multifamily, since most of our listeners, they understand multifamily apartments. So when you're looking at mobile home parks, it feels like a step down to a lot of people. So talk to us
yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a litany of differences. I'll try to maybe just pick some of the top ones. First and foremost, most of the communities that we own, the residents typically own their home, and so when we're buying the mobile home community, we're buying the common area, the infrastructure, the roads, water lines, sewer lines, the real property itself. We're not buying the actual personal property, which are the mobile homes, and so what that allows is an asset that has a lot lower, ongoing maintenance costs, a lot less oversight. Because ultimately what happens is when one of those residents that owns that home that's renting a lot from us, when they have a plumbing issue that's in the home, they have a roofing issue or AC issue or anything else related to the physical structure of that home, they don't call us, and it's not our responsibility. They call the vendor themselves directly, and they handle it. And so it allows for not just a lower ongoing maintenance as far as the assets concerned, but also it creates stickier residents. These folks own their home, they rent this lot, and these homes, although they're called mobile homes, are not really all that mobile. Yes, they had wheels on them at one point in time. You can put axles and wheels on them again, and you can transport them somewhere else, but it's quite a process. I mean, they're anchored into the ground by numerous different anchor points around the home. They're blocked up, they're leveled. And so it costs quite a bit of money to move these homes to another location. A single wide can run you anywhere from, I'd say nowadays the price has gone up quite a bit, $7,000 to move and reset to, north of $12,000, depending on what market you're in. And then if it's a double wide, go ahead and double that price point. So it's fairly cost prohibitive a lot of times for folks that we're talking about affordable housing here for the most part. For folks that are living, that are that demographic that are living in an affordable housing community to, consider the economic advantages of paying $5, $7, $10,000 to move their home somewhere else. And so a lot of times, if they do move, it's just like owning a stick-built home. They put their home for sale. They continue paying the lot rent. They sell it to somebody else that the community has to approve. But we never see a point in time where we have a turnover on that lot rent. And don't get me wrong, things happen. Folks pass away. Every once in a while you get someone that does own their home and they just stop paying and we have to go through the eviction process, but it does not happen near as often as it might happen in an apartment. And the reason being is that if they stop paying their lot rent, not only do they run the risk of being kicked out, they run the risk of probably losing the most valuable asset that they own to their name, which is that home. And that could be a $10,000 mobile home. It could be a $60,000 mobile home, but those types of evictions just don't happen often. We literally have, I know of one in our entire portfolio that's happened in this calendar year, and we own thousands of units. So it just doesn't happen all that often. So those are some of the big reasons. Another one is that, and this is changing very quickly, is that when we started buying these assets, it was a very fragmented space. Whereas comparing it to multifamily has been consolidated, for many years now. Institutions and big players in the space, lots of institutional capital pouring in, and more of it every day. Mobile home parks, that was not the case. I would say that that's changing rapidly. Whereas when we got into it, it was pretty much mom and pop operators with just a few. There was like 2 publicly traded companies, but 90% of the parks out there were owned by, either the first generation or maybe second generation owner. And a lot of those owners, and it's still situation today, a lot of those owners are kind of aging out of these assets. They're looking to sell, and a lot of them haven't kept up with market rents. Their basis is so low. There's many parks we bought where they owned them free and clear. And so, they never really saw a reason to raise rents $25 a year or keep up with CPI or anything like that. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well to get into something that's, again, great market, great location, but just owner, they've had it for 30, 35 years as legacy owner, and they haven't kept up with the market itself. And so you can get in and, push rents fairly easily, maybe bill back utilities. That's another common theme. A lot of, generational owners back then, water and sewer wasn't expensive. And so it was just part of your bill. You pay your lot rent, water and sewer is included. Now it's a easy way for us to add additional revenue to the bottom line by simply putting meters in, billing that back, and charging folks for their appropriate usage. And so those are just a couple of reasons why we love the space. And lastly, I think everyone knows, we talk about affordable housing all the time. Like there's a massive shortage of affordable housing in the country, and mobile home parks really fill a unique void in that space. You get a lot for your money. A family of 4 can comfortably live in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile home, and most of the time can live in that 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile home for cheaper than what they might pay for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, definitely a stick-built home, but even an nearby apartment, comparable apartment, they'll probably live cheaper, and they have the opportunity of owning that home then too. So just lots of benefits to the asset class. And I could keep going on and on, but I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna stop rambling and open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to understand, right? You said a couple of things that I think stood out to me, and I want to come back to the first one, which is you can buy these properties and you're really focusing on kind of the land and the infrastructure, not the
Right.
personal property, not the building itself, or in this case, not the mobile homes, but the land, the plumbing, the stuff underneath the yard. And that means that your expenses are going to be a little bit lighter because you're not doing as much repairs, you're not doing as much maintenance. You talked about the evictions. Well, you don't have as many evictions because one, you're not worried about the buildings, right? So they're basically taking their mobile homes, they're buying them, they're putting them there, they're locking them down. And this is something that if they do end up moving, typically they're going to sell that mobile home and then buy another one when they do move. But you're not seeing as much of that as an issue or a challenge. The way you illustrated that was you have thousands of units and only one eviction that you're aware of for this year. So
Yeah.
I think that underscores that point, particularly when times get a little hard for Americans. So it's really good to understand that. I
Well,
want
I
to
mean,
go
I think
back to yeah.
and not to interrupt you, I think another point to make there that kind of goes in with what you're saying is, when they own their own home, their monthly lot rent, for example, across our portfolio, our average lot rent, some markets are more expensive than others, but our average lot rent is probably in the low 400s, by 425 ish. And so if someone falls on hard times, they lose a job, just have some type of economic impact that is detrimental to their well-being and paying their bills and all that. Most people, if they know that literally the risk of losing that roof over their head, they got to figure out a way, to come up with $425 net given month. Most people, no matter who you are, can figure out a way, beg, borrow, steal, go buy a 24 pack of water at CVS for $3 and go sell them for $1. You know, you could figure out a way to come up with $425. Very different than, you know, if the rent $1,600 a month. That's a big mountain for some, right? And so it's just it's a very manageable amount of money to pay to continually have a roof over your head. So I wanted to make that point there as well. So that's also a reason why evictions are so much lower in a scenario where they actually own their own home.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to clarify, especially when you have wages, for some of these entry level jobs shooting up as well. It should be
That's
manageable at
right.
least to pay for, the lot rent.
Mhm.
But one of the things, I know folks who have invested in mobile homes, and one of the challenges that I hear is, hey, this is way more work than I anticipated. Maybe they came in with fresh eyes and, saw some of the return projections and got super excited. And, maybe there was some challenges there. I know you focus on buying property that, you're not buying the actual mobile homes, you're buying the land. One, why is that so important for you? And could you talk a little bit more about maybe
Yeah.
some of the challenges that people face when you
Mhm.
are actually buying kind of not just the land, but the homes and actually renting those homes as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll clarify. So in a perfect world, John, wow, we wouldn't own any homes. That's a perfect world. We don't live in one. So with that being said, we have a number of communities that when we acquired them, they had the model where there was no home ownership, right? Like, or there was no units owned by the park itself. It was all 100% resident owned homes. And so we buy in that way, we keep it that way. However, there's communities that might have started that way 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and for XYZ reasons. It's kind of hard to go back and figure out exactly how the business model shifted and maybe some of the things that we bought over the years. But, we end up acquiring 10% of the community or rental units that are owned by the park. And maybe it's because folks passed away and, the heirs didn't want it. And so the park just literally took it back and turned it into a rental. Like that happens actually quite often. In the sense, or in a situation where maybe someone might just abandon their home for whatever reason. Maybe they couldn't sell it, or they tried to ask too much, and they finally just like, you know what, I got a job in Oklahoma. I'm out of here. I'm just going to leave. And they literally leave the home there. And that happens too. Park gets it back. There's a process you can go through where you become the new rightful owner. That's an abandoned title process. Park turns into a rental. They have the option to maybe resell it, but a lot of times they'll just turn it into a rental. So again, in the perfect world, we won't own any, but we do. I think about 15% of our portfolio of the number of spaces are actual units that we own. Some parks zero. Some parks, we might have 30% of the community that's community owned homes. We have internal programs. We try to sell them back. We'll offer discounted cash prices just to get them off our books. Because we know
Mhm.
once a couple of reasons. Number one, the repairs and maintenance ongoing on it's just like a Class C apartment, right? Like an old legacy Class C apartment complex. I mean, mechanicals rolled. I mean, like your repairs and maintenance costs are significantly higher with an old unit than something that is fairly new. And so we want to get that burden off our balance sheet as fast as possible. We'll blow it out at a fire sale cash price just to get someone in there, or do some type of internal lease option home ownership program. But ultimately, we know that once we can get them to home ownership, number one, that burdens off our plate. And number two, their financial nut to crack each month is really low with just the lot rent. And we know that we never will get a call again about a roof or an AC or anything like that. And they'll stay a long time. Like they become much stickier in that scenario than when they're just there renting. Just like an apartment, you get organic turnover with apartment units, just like you do with rental units in a mobile home park. So, to speak to maybe some folks that get into the space and they find out that maybe it's not what they envisioned. It's a lot harder work. And I think the best way to maybe, um, to help maybe unravel that is just like in apartment complexes, just like in single family residential investments. Go anywhere in the country, any city, you can find a really bad neighborhood on the wrong side of the tracks with the wrong demographic that you can't fix a market. You can't fix a neighborhood unless you buy the whole neighborhood, but you can't fix a surrounding. And so no matter how much money you pump into something, you're not going to fix the bad element surrounding it. Okay. So that exists in apartments, mobile home parks, and single family subdivisions. And you got blue collar, right in the middle. You got all that in the apartment space and the mobile home park space and the single family space. And then you got really high end stuff, on the other end of the spectrum. And so if you're just buying a mobile home park, you're not really taking any of those other things into consideration. You're buying in not a great market or the wrong neighborhood, wrong part of town. It's got really old, worn out units. It's got, the bad element in there. And unfortunately, that's all surrounding it. It's going to be a lot of work. You're going to be dealing with a bad demographic, people that don't like paying their rent, people that try to work the system, people that have people they hang out with that aren't all that desirable as well. And like, it's hard to fix that. And the same goes though, if you bought a single family home in a bad part of town, like it's just, you're not gonna be able to change. You're gonna bang your head against the wall. You're gonna fight to collect rent. They're gonna literally wear that house out, right? Like, no, wear it out more than that person that's a white collar, A class, neighborhood. Same goes with apartments, right? So I think I think the general misconception that a lot of people get is like they hear me like maybe talking about some of the benefits of mobile home parks, but we're very particular about the markets we buy in. We're very particular about the parks that we buy, about the existing demographic, about the surrounding neighborhoods. And I've bought some really rough stuff. I mean, I've bought some nasty stuff, but the immediate surrounding neighborhood is great. The school district is great. And I know that all I got to do is get the bad element out. There's plenty of good people willing to come in, right? But if I buy that same bad park in a horrible area, it doesn't matter how much money I dump into it. It's going to be a headache and it's going to be an albatross that's going to like literally give me gray hairs way too early. And I've already got enough of them. So I think that's why. I think that's the misconception. And I think probably the same applies to people that hear all the benefits of multifamily and they go out and they go buy some multifamily. They start shopping they'll start looking at just cap rates. They'll go on LoopNet and shop by cap rates, and they'll go buy some, I don't know, 24 unit in Podunk, Alabama or Mississippi in the middle of nowhere and just look at the projected returns. And then they'll realize that literally the only employer in town is Dollar General and the other jobs are 45 minutes away. And literally there's a lot of drugs in this town and a lot of crime, and it's just my AC units are getting stolen. There's no way to fix that. So anyway,
Kevin,
that's how I would maybe help unravel those that are having challenges with this industry or this asset class, and I think it's just asset by asset.
Kevin, I love the way you describe that because it comes back to the fundamentals of commercial real estate investing don't really vary as much as I think some people think they do, right? And if you are, looking to get in mobile homes because maybe you can't find good deals in multifamily, I think just jumping into the category itself may not be the right solution. You need to understand a lot of what Kevin's talking about, which is you still have to understand your markets. You still have to understand your demographics. You still have to understand, the employment drivers. You have to understand all these different things. And you talked about, low end, high end, B class, working class. All these things still matter if you're going to invest in mobile homes. So you don't just go in and say, okay, it's a mobile home, whatever, they're all the same. So I don't have to look at the metrics as much or look at the demographics as much. Let's just buy one and go. You still have to do a lot of this research. And you obviously have done that and seen people who have maybe failed at doing that. And maybe that's where a lot of those challenges arise from. Kevin, you've been investing in mobile homes for over a decade at this point. Can you talk to me about just some of those lessons learned along the way over the last 10 years that maybe you could help a newer investor maybe avoid some of those mistakes you made early on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, I think the one we just spoke to is, and I've got a pretty funny story related to that. Again, you could never change the market, and so, and I knew that back when we started buying mobile home. I mean, like, in the same fundamentals apply to any asset class. It doesn't matter. That was always ingrained in my head. However, there was a mobile home park. I think it was maybe the fourth or fifth one that we bought, and it was in a small town in Georgia, and it was a distressed deal, and it had good history to it. It had looked good at one point in time. I understood the story of why it went into foreclosure, why the bank took it back. It was like a 72 unit park. Needed a ton of work, but the thing that scared me about this particular park wasn't how it used to look and how it might be able to look again. Is that this little town, although it had a private liberal arts college there, which none of the people lived in that park, right? One of the big employers, there was a big Carrier air conditioning. They had a big manufacturing plant in this town, and after the Great Recession, that plant went bye-bye and it was empty. And so that was one of the major employers in this area. And there weren't many other employers other than just, again, like retail service type oriented stuff. But even then it was a small population in this town. And I wouldn't say that there was a shortage of affordable housing. Like, you could literally go rent a single family home for, a 3-bedroom home for $750 a month, something like that. And this is back in 2000 and 14, 15 era, somewhere around there. And I remember my partner at the time, we saw this thing, and he's like, "Man, we should make an offer." And I'm like, "I don't want that. I don't want to buy. I didn't even want the project. Like I had too much going on already. I was like, I just don't want this headache." And so I literally, they were originally asking like it had sold for the loan that went into foreclosure was at $1.6 million, and it had been in an REO for like 2 years. And I mean, it was way worse shape than when they took it back. A lot of residents had moved their homes, and anyway, um, they were asking 700. I literally made them an offer at $100,000 because I was like, I told my partner, I was like, I don't want this thing. I literally don't want the headache. And so I made such a low, egregious offer that there's no way they would take it. And I remember where I was the day I got the call that they accepted my offer. And and I did back out. We ended up buying it, and we did fine, but we literally bought it at 100. And so, like, more of the story is that we literally paid $100,000 for it. We put like we paid 125 for it. We put like another 200 into it. Did a ton of cleanup, but we fought tooth and nail to attract quality residents into there because there weren't any that I mean, there wasn't enough to pull from. There wasn't a good pool of good quality people that had jobs, that had stability, that had half decent credit, had any money to move in. There was plenty of people that replied to the ads, but not even remotely close to the quality that we were looking for. And our bar wasn't set super high. And we fought tooth and nail to get that place even remotely stabilized. And we did okay with it. When we sold it, we made money. We didn't lose money, but it wasn't worth the 2 years that we put into it. It just wasn't. Like we literally we worked 10 times harder on making that profit than what we do in the stuff that we buy today in good markets, solid underlying fundamentals, plenty of population to actually pull from. And so again, just harping on location, location, location. Don't sell yourself short on buying something because you're literally picking up for next to nothing. I mean, we literally bought that thing we talk about below replacement cost. I mean, like it was a joke how cheap we bought that, and we still had a hard time making the numbers work. So with all that being said, some of the other lessons I think, um, you know, gosh, what are some other, I and I don't want to harp on like, the brokerage world. I mean, we've bought many deals through brokers and all that, but I think just, buying on pro forma, especially in the last couple of years, I've looked at different OMs and I've just kind of giggled of like, again, taking the C class asset, maybe it's in a good market, but it's still a C class asset. You still have a C class demographic, right? And seeing like how low the expenses are in the OM, and pushing rents like through the roof. Guess what? I mean, like even though it's affordable housing, those folks still might have a challenge with $100 rent increase each month or 150. And so like literally building your model and buying around a pro forma. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make in multiple different industries. You got to understand the asset. Get with another person that's been in the business and get their feedback. Because most of the brokers, again, I love the brokerage world, but a lot of them they never buy assets. They work with folks that buy assets, but they actually don't own them. They've never been in the trenches themselves. And so they're doing the best of their ability to underwrite, what might happen or what should happen or what could happen, but not necessarily reality of probably what will happen. So that's a big one. That's a big one. Partner with somebody else. Same thing with and any other asset. Like figure out someone that's been there, done that, like school hard knocks, like they've literally taken their bruises and their lumps, and get their input as to what could go wrong that I'm not seeing here. Things such as infrastructure. That's a big one. I see people buy parks on, septics and private sewer systems, which we own a bunch of them with septics and wastewater treatment plants and all that. But we spend tons of money in due diligence getting engineers involved and inspecting these things and being very thorough with it. And, on the front side, some people, if they're just getting started, they might not want to drop, 40 grand on an engineer report, to thoroughly evaluate the systems, the private sewer systems. And because they're like, oh my God, I'm not getting that money back. That's money, that's pursuit costs. That's money spent. Whereas you buy the property, you realize that, oh man, this thing needs a couple major parts, to the tune of $100,000, like grinder pumps and all kinds of other stuff that go wrong with these things. And it completely foils your economic model that you put forth. So again, I feel like I'm rambling now, but like I could go on and on. There's just there's a lot of mistakes that not necessarily I've made, but I've seen people make, and they're costly. And as you and I both know, those costly mistakes, that literally could be the difference of you actually making money on a deal and you losing money on a deal, right? Like one accidental $100,000 CapEx that you didn't plan for could completely wipe out any profits you'll ever make on that property. So you might just be working for free now for a couple of years as you try to get out of that asset. And you just don't want that to happen. That's not a fun way to real estate, invest in real estate.
Yeah, man. You just gave a lot of great information. So the first thing you said was location, right? That deal you said, you didn't even want it because it wasn't in a great location, small town in Georgia, where that carrier plant closed. But you
I
made a
knew.
ridiculously low ball offer, ended up getting the deal, and you made the most of it. But that location just
Yeah.
doesn't change, and that's an important lesson to learn. You knew it, but sometimes we get it reinforced, nonetheless. But the
If I would
location
have
is
paid
key.
what they were asking, which
Oh my
they're
lord, I
touting
can
as
only
it was like
imagine.
$10,000 a lot, like which is it was still below replacement cost what they're asking.
Yeah.
We would have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think we ended up selling it for like 825. So there was but if we would have bought it for 7 and put, a
Right.
couple hundred
Oh,
into
yeah.
it, and then we didn't make it, it didn't cash flow at all for a year and a half.
Yeah.
So, anyway, didn't mean to
Took
interrupt
some
you, brother.
time. Yep. Location, you talked about pro forma from the brokers, and the only thing I'll add there is, the broker's job is to sell the property for the most amount of money he can get for the
Right.
seller.
Mhm.
Just keep that in mind. So they're gonna tell a story, they're gonna sell a vision, and it may or may not be rooted in reality, but understand what their objective is. And typically, you're
Sure.
working with a seller's broker, and that's their client. If you're a buyer, recognize that there's only one side of that equation that is going to make sure they get paid. And that's the seller side. They don't care who the buyer is. They're looking to find that person. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at it. Due diligence. You talked about being key, and in particular for mobile homes, the systems, the sewer systems, the water systems.
Mhm.
Really important to understand all that, and make sure you make that investment. I would say, Kevin, as I listen to you and kind of all the things you went through, a lot of this is universal, but obviously tied to mobile homes. I know you've invested in a lot of different asset classes, though, and in particular, I know you've been doing a little bit more in kind of the parking lot world, which I think is extremely interesting because who wouldn't want to just own a parking lot? There's no building, maybe you have a parking structure, but it's just the lot, and you're getting paid for people coming in and out with their cars. How did you get into parking lots? And tell me a little bit more about
Yeah.
what you're doing in that space.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've always considered myself kind of a contrarian investor, trying to figure out, where the herd's not going, going the opposite direction, and just maybe trying to find an industry or a niche that hasn't been exploited yet, right? And so, obviously, just like you, I've been doing a podcast for many years, going on 10 years, which is crazy. And outside of like normal interviews, maybe with other multifamily guys or mobile home park guys or just the major food groups in real estate. I get niches every once in a while, like really interesting niches. And one of them, now it's probably been 5 years, maybe a little bit longer now. I interviewed a guy that he was one of a handful of brokers that specialized in parking assets across the country, and he was an owner as well. He owned a small portfolio of parking assets, and in that interview, I didn't know anything about. I try to educate myself a little bit, before I get on to a topic that I know nothing about. And there's just no information out there on investing in parking lots. I mean, theoretically, it seems easy to understand, and for the most part, it is. There's some nuances with operations and things like that, but um, I got on that call, and just had fun for an hour, just asking every question that I had that I couldn't find answers to. And by the end of that call, I was like, there's something here. This sounds very eerily similar to mobile home parks when I had heard about it 5 years prior to that. Just not a lot of competition. Just it's kind of like if you know, but if you don't, you don't, right? Like so, the people that own
Oh,
these things, like they're happy, they're cash flowing, they've got these irreplaceable locations, but yet there's not a lot of institutional capital. It's not a consolidated industry, and so like that was intriguing enough to where we never jump into anything quickly without doing a lot of research. So we spent a good 2 years. We went to association meetings. There's like three major associations. We'd go to like the annual meetings, get to know people in the industry, and just try to understand the space well enough that we could convey the all the benefits and of the investment that's to our investors, and be comfortable doing so. And so that's what we did. And I guess about 2.5, 3 years ago, we bought our first parking asset, and we own more mobile home parks than we do parking, but It's a very interesting niche. It's one that we kind of look at it as again, location, location, location. So we look at an asset, it's got to support itself with the in-place cash flow. Like it's so we look at it purely from an economic standpoint. Like it's got to make sense from an investment perspective. But aside from that, is we want to know that whatever we're buying, whatever location it's in, that the lowest valuable or the lowest value to it is that in its current state as a parking lot or a parking garage, meaning that like the location is so prime that inevitably it might take 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but that location will have a higher and better use because it's literally surrounded by massive growth and, parking lots are slowly getting redeveloped into, other types of uses. And so we look at it as a phenomenal cash flowing covered land play, a way for us to generate good returns for our investors, but also know that there is icing on the cake somewhere down the road, but we don't need that icing to make the economics work. And so it's treated us well. We own garages and we own parking lots. Parking lots, again, speaking to that perfect world, if we could just have an entire portfolio of surface parking lots, because there's literally not there's nothing that can go wrong. I mean, asphalt or gravel, you might have a pothole here and there. You might have to repaint the curb stops, replace some signage, but that's really it. There's
Yeah.
nothing, there's no infrastructure really that goes bad or that gets impacted by salt or water intrusion or anything like that. So it's been a very profitable niche for us, and one that we've enjoyed greatly over the last couple of years.
Kevin, how do you analyze that, right? So in my head, I'm like, okay, you talked about a cash flowing property, it's got to support itself, knowing that long term, there's a better use for it than a parking lot. So you're expecting some developer or someone else to come
Yeah.
along, offer you more money than what it's making as a parking lot, and that's kind of your exit. But what are you looking at? I mean, is it more like a business at this point? Because you're looking at just purely the income, and I'm not sure what expenses you even have on a parking lot outside of taxes. So maybe you just give us a little bit more context there.
Yeah, so like it's a great question. We don't put any value on the future value at all. Like it's only in place revenue. And then just like any other asset, like there's value, like we're value add guys. And so I want to find a lot in a great location that's performing well today, but know that there's some upside there and that it's either being managed by like there's a litany of parking operators in the country that they don't own the assets. There's the management company and they manage these assets for the owners, and there's some really good ones, there's some okay ones, and there's some horrific ones that are antiquated. They don't use technology, they don't accept credit cards. They've got the guy that's collecting cash, and
Sitting in a
probably
stool.
pocketing half of it. What I mean? So like things like I look like to me that's value. To me, like that's upside. I know that there's a lot of money being left on the table. Now there's a lot of technology that allows you to implement dynamic pricing. Like they literally it follows the trends of supply demand, and when there's events happening in the area, like it literally figures out what other people are charging and pushes your rates, and lowers them when demand's lower. And you see a lot of these older operators, they don't utilize that technology. So we first look at that. We say, okay, where's the opportunity lie here? You asked about the expenses. Really, surface lots, that's it, taxes and insurance and minor upkeep. Like there's really nothing else. A general liability policy as well, which typically, if you have a management company overseeing it, normally they would actually put it underneath their GL policy. But insurance, general liability insurance, taxes, and that's really it, and some upkeep. Parking structure is a little bit more than that. There's infrastructure there. There's iron rebar and concrete and things like that. There's a lot more involved in a parking structure, depending on where it's located and its
Yeah.
age. It's up in the Northeast are susceptible to salt, all that stuff that deteriorates the iron rebar on the inside. And we've seen some we backed away from. They were too far gone. You couldn't even band-aid it to like limp it along. It would probably collapse in 10 or 15 years. So I think I'm going off the rails here of your original question, but I'll share an example of a recent case study of a deal we bought, and I think that will maybe help understand how we look at these things and where we see value and how we extract that value. So, parking garage that we bought here in our backyard in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Um, it's a unique one because it literally was only like 5 years old when we bought it. So very rarely do you see standalone parking garages built anymore, especially in a dense location like that. Normally they're part of a hotel or a condo unit or something like that. This one was a standalone, and it was a partnership. When it was planned and developed, it was a partnership between the city of Clearwater and a local private developer that developed the property. And they condoized it. It was like seven floors, 702 spaces, and it had 12,000 square feet of retail at the ground level. And the city owned the top 4 floors of parking. The local developer owned the bottom 3 floors, and he owned the retail. And the developer got the better deal, a better deal. They did better negotiations in this whole endeavor because, in normal times, when, it's not a, July 4th weekend or holiday weekend, the first 3 floors always get the cars first. Only, on busy weekends do people drive to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th floor, right? Like it's not full all the time. And so the city continually lost money. It never met their pro forma internally. On top of that, the city had other projects they wanted money for. And on top of all that, the city are just bad business people. Typically, they don't make good business decisions. And so the rates for hourly parking in this city, in the beach area, was just on a normal basis about $5 to $6 an hour. And then on busy weekends, holidays, it could be as much as $40, $50 flat fee. They were charging, up until like a couple months before we bought it, they were charging $2 an hour, and they didn't make any pricing adjustments of busy times. And so they also had this private developer locked into where they couldn't make pricing adjustments without without the mutual decision of all parties. And so just they weren't making money. They weren't making a lot of money. They weren't making nearly as much money as they should have. And so I looked at it, I said, this is a beautiful asset, great condition. City wants out. They want their $12 million back that they put into it, because they're losing money every year and they've got better uses for that money. The private developers, he actually did well. He had a really low basis. He had been making money even at the lower rate because he had the best parking, but he was ready to put his capital into something else. And so we basically worked with both parties for like a year. It took a long time to put it together. And we ended up buying the entirety of that structure. And immediately, day one, went in and raised the hourly rates to $6 an hour from there at $3 when we took it over. So we doubled the revenue just like that. We were still in alignment with the market. It's a phenomenal location. We didn't lose any parkers at all. And then on top of that, we worked with the local parking operator that came in and instituted, more dynamic monthly parking programs for the restaurant workers and the hotel workers and all the other surrounding businesses that the city just did a horrific job at doing. They didn't have a good structure in place to put that together. And then on busy weekends, instead of charging $6 an hour, it goes up to 30, sometimes 40, sometimes $50 an hour. And, it just boosts the revenue on the holiday weekends or when there's special events happening. So we literally bought that property. I think I don't want to throw out numbers. I think the NOI was like 1.67 million when we bought it. And literally within like 2 months, we got the NOI up to it was like 2.3-ish, give or take, literally just by making some very simple business decisions. And this one was basically brand new condition. It only been built 5 years prior. So bought it for $34 million, including the retail. Yep. Retail had all triple net tenants in it, and the retail was stable. There's nothing there. Bought for $34 million, and like literally 3 months later, it appraised for $48.7 million. So
I love it, man. I love it.
So and that's just that exists all across the board. I told you we just closed on a parking garage 2 weeks ago in downtown Phoenix. They've had the same operator in there for like years, and it's one of the most antiquated operators. They're a big group, but their proprietary technology is like 15 years old. There's there's like bad reviews if you go to the website for this parking garage, because people get stuck behind 20 other cars trying to get out because the gate won't go up. It's not reading their key fob. I mean, like, it's a disaster, and it still does well. And so we just bought it on the in-place income of what it was doing, and literally just upgrading the equipment, spending about $250 grand upgrading the equipment, putting a better operator in there with a dynamic pricing model that's going to adjust it accordingly. And we'll more than likely probably see like a 20%, maybe even more than that, increase of top line revenues in that property just by making some very simple business decisions. So
I love it. Kevin, I think it's very helpful for us to understand how you're looking at investment opportunities, those two examples of investing in these parking lots that are attached to other things, but recognize that you can create value, and it just opens us up to more things. And I know that folks can work with you. We're running a little light on time here, but two things. One, if you want to learn more about Kevin and some of the investments that him and his team have, go to his website, investwithsunrise.com. And he also has a book that he penned last year, and you can get that at kevinbupp.com/free book. So make sure you check out both of those. We'll link to them in the show notes. Right now, Kevin, we're going to run to our round of insights. Are you ready?
All right, let's do it.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Yeah, I mean, 2008 was rough. I lost pretty much everything. Personal house was in foreclosure. Credit went down to 450. Bank account got garnished and literally had zero money. But it really it pushed me into focusing on health and fitness and just becoming a better individual altogether. I mean, you get pushed into the corner, you figure it out, and hopefully second time around, you're a little smarter and make better decisions. So
Give
that's
me
probably
a
a big one for me.
digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Slack has been a game changer. We've been using it for like 4 or 5 years internally, and it keeps our internal team glued together as well as other third-party vendors we work with, and it's just a very efficient tool.
All right, give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year, besides your own, of course.
The Go Giver, and I forget who the author is, but I should know now because I've bought 100 plus copies for various people, and I always recommend a book. It's an easy, short read, but it's incredibly powerful.
What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
Uh, I don't necessarily do visualization, but I work out. I try to, Matthew McConaughey. I heard this from him like 10 years ago. I break a sweat every day, no matter what that means. Whether it be running, going to the gym, what have you. But like that's kind of my meditative time. I'm not necessarily meditating, but like I'm by myself. I normally don't listen to music, and I just kind of get my thoughts out. But it's typically during some type of physical exercise, and that sets me up for a phenomenal day every time. The days I miss it, which are rare, I can tell. It has an
Different days.
impact.
Kevin, because you invest in a few different asset classes, I'm going to ask this question more broadly, but give me your number one insight for commercial real estate investing.
Yeah, I think it's just not just education. I'll go just a little deeper. Is really teaming up or aligning yourself with someone that's been there and done that, not just necessarily selling a program or something like that. And I'm not harping on that, but like just someone that's actually been through it, and even better if they've been through a cycle or two, right? And but just aligning yourself with them to learn the real world, not necessarily just the theoretical world.
There we go. Well, let's lighten the mood. Kevin, give us your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a tough one, John. I wasn't prepared for that one. I don't know. I love my wife's cooking, honestly, and we go out to dinner often. But I'm also a homebody, so really sitting at the dinner table with family is probably my favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
All right, we'll use that one. Well, Kevin, listen, great talking to you, great catching up and hearing all the things you've been working on. I find great value in listening to how you talked about mobile home investing, mobile home parks, specifically understanding that a lot of those fundamentals that from a multifamily standpoint or other asset classes, they're true here. You definitely want to make sure you understand what's happening in that area, who the key employers are, and then understanding those expenses, going through your due diligence, running your numbers properly, and the big takeaway is aligning yourself with people that have experience and knowledge in that space. Someone who's done it before, learn from them, partner with them. That's going to make it a lot easier. Again, if you want to learn about Kevin, his team, and what they've got going on, you can check out their website, investwithsunrise.com. And again, he's got a book called The Cash Flow Investor, which you can get at kevinbupp.com/free book. Kevin, thanks again for being a great guest. Great catching up with you. And I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, John. A lot of fun, buddy. Take care.